Hey guys, and welcome to a very special February edition of Life After Hours. And as for our regular visitors or regular attendees, you'll know that Life After Hours is that time of the month when we shine a light into the dark corners of personal finance and try to generate a little bit of enlightenment. And tonight we're probably talking about or visiting the deepest, darkest corner, and that's how we deal with money as a couple. Possibly one of the toughest challenges we face. That if dealing with money is complicated, money comes with baggage, comes with beliefs, comes with values, and dealing with it as a couple makes that even harder. So that's what we're talking about tonight. There is an ebook that covers this off. I'll give you a link to that towards the end of the evening. So before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. There is a chat, so put your questions in the chat. And if you don't want everyone to see it, stick it in the Q&A panel. I'll try and get back to those at the end, because these evenings are not about me, they're about you. And so I'll talk for a little bit, take you through the 10 worst marriage-killing money phrases and what you can use instead. And then we'll move to questions. And at the end, I'll leave you with a couple of links to some more content, and in particular the ebook that will give you a little bit more information about each of these marriage-killing money phrases. So just before we get started, while everyone's clambering into the webinar room, we, of course, acknowledge the Camaragal people, the earliest recorded inhabitants of the land that today we call North Sydney. And so with that, then I'm going to tee up the slides and we can get started. The topic of love and money and the words we use to talk about money is a really important topic. And we know that financial arguments and financial stress are one of the biggest causes of divorce in the country. It may not be the proximate cause, but it usually features in there somewhere. And I think tonight's message is really that words matter. How we say things matters as much as what we say. And this is not about self-censorship or about biting your tongue. This is really about thinking about what you're saying and the message it delivers. And your money personality. So if you haven't done your money personality test, go to Basecamp and do that. That will tell you a lot about how we receive the words that we hear. And what you say may not be what your partner hears. And that's really the essence of having the ability to talk about money without having the money talk. And so tonight I've got 10 of the worst phrases that we can use. And it starts with the you don't earn enough. Now, this is distinctly different from we don't earn enough. And that's something that we can deal with. But to imply, or what this message can be heard as, is that we're struggling as a couple because you don't earn enough. And that's a pretty depressing message to hear. And one of the things that we're going to see through this is that when we think about money as a couple, we've got to have a single system. So we talk about one bed, one money system at Life Sherpa. Now, that's not to say that you have to have all joint accounts or that you can't run a completely separate financial structure. But you do need to think about money as a couple. That may very well give you better tax outcomes. It might give you better investing outcomes, and it will certainly give you a better relationship outcome. And for most people, they'll be somewhere in the middle. So there's on one extreme, you have completely separate, and on the other extreme, you have completely joint. And for many people, there will be some combination of yours, mine, and ours that leads to the money system. So be careful what you say. The second one, number 9 on the 10 most dangerous expressions, is I get to spend more because I earn more. And whilst that might be something that you agree as a couple, the presumption that the higher earner somehow has a special privilege is not a way to cohesive relationship. Now, you might choose to divvy up your spending buckets after you paid for the house and groceries and all those other things in proportion to your income. Nothing wrong with that. But the presumption that I'm the higher earner, therefore I get to spend more, is, I think, a dangerous one. Number 8 on the list is it's not your business what I spend money on. And this, again, is often comes from 2 places. One, it comes from believing that you're entitled to spend more. And second, sometimes it also comes from embarrassment or concern that you don't really want to share what you're spending on. And sometimes this hides behavioral issues like gambling, drugs, alcohol. But it is important that you do have personal spending. There's nothing less romantic than a birthday gift or a Valentine's Day gift or a Christmas gift paid for from the joint account. And so it is important to have your own pool of money where what you spend it on, as long as it's legal, is no one else's business. So that's the first 3, and they largely deal with, ownership of money and spending. The second group begins at number 7 with the how could you not know about X? Usually in a household, there will be one member who does a bit more of the running. We call them the household CFO. In the Japanese culture, that's generally the wife. In Western cultures, it has more traditionally been the bloke. Today, we obviously see a very wide range of these. Sometimes it's the finance professional in the household, but often someone just has a greater interest in doing it, or a greater attention to detail, or a greater desire for structure and security. So that's all good, but don't necessarily assume that the other person knows the detail or the more complex finance behind the question. And it's also a message that to ask questions that if you don't understand, ask, and you really shouldn't be doing stuff that you don't understand. So, this is where you need to talk about it and do so in a sharing environment. Number 6 is, again, this is a comment on the nature of your spending. This is often quite gendered, and we often see guys getting blamed for spending money on games or alcohol, and a female spouse getting grief for spending on clothes or fashion or beauty. Now, these are stereotypes, but they're stereotypes for a reason, because we see this all the time. That's not to say that everyone is in that position, but, getting a family or household budget that delivers enough joy for everybody and that you are on the same page when it comes to making sacrifices And sure, if you're saving for a home deposit, for example, and you've agreed that you're not going to spend, and then the other person goes and, quotes, wastes money on something that's important to them, that could be a symptom that the goal's not a shared goal. So we need to look beyond the surface in these things. Number 5 is the presumption that somebody who works in finance is somehow better equipped to deal with these things. There is a world of difference between managing a business budget and managing a household budget. A business budget is much more numbers-based and possibly less nuanced, whereas a household budget is very much tied up in psychology, goals, and behavior. So be very careful about this, especially if you're married to an accountant, that being a good accountant doesn't make you good at managing your personal finances. Being a software engineer might make you analytical and might make you good at putting spreadsheets together, but it doesn't make you a good investor necessarily. And in fact, some of the things that make you a good software engineer are the things that will prevent you being a good investor. So, home roles and work roles, don't confuse them, is the message here. And coming in at number 4 is this is one I often see with guys with midlife crisis. The guy goes out and buys the Harley on his 50th birthday and then turns up with it on the basis that forgiveness is easier to get than permission. It might be true, but it's certainly not a basis for a long-term trusting relationship. So be very careful of this. And some of this comes back to how you organize your finances, that you shouldn't have to ask permission for everything that you spend. You do need to agree a threshold where you get to do what you want to do, and a threshold above which, particularly if it involves debt, where you will talk about it first. It's one thing to go buy a first edition 12-inch vinyl of some classic record, and another to go and buy a $50,000 Harley. So, the size and quantum relative to your agreed threshold is what really matters here. Now we're coming into the really dangerous ones. And these ones are about ownership of the decisions. And this can be seen from two sides. So, as I said earlier, we generally have one member of a couple who is more willing or able or dedicated or focused or committed to dealing with the paperwork and the admin. The person who remembers that the electricity bill is due, the person who is happy to sit on the phone and argue the toss about the power plan. And it can be tempting, either because you're genuinely not interested, or you are seeking to avoid conflict, to roll over and go, look, whatever you think, sweetheart. And that can come across as, I don't really care, or it doesn't matter. And that's a really dangerous place to go, because the opposite of that we'll get to in just a moment. So this is really important about demonstrating that you do care, you are interested, and to some extent that you appreciate your partner's efforts in this area. That there's a lot of personal admin needs to get done. Some of it can be automated, but there is a lot of work, and this is about acknowledging that work and being interested in the outcome. Not necessarily to nitpick or supervise or second guess. It's more about demonstrating that you are interested in your financial future as a couple, you do appreciate what your partner's doing, and you're taking some form of ownership into it. The counter to that is the don't worry, I've got this under control. And sometimes this comes from as a reaction to the previous one. So if you're the household CFO and you're doing all the work and your partner goes, yeah, whatever, it's then tempting to hold that information to yourself, and a partner who hasn't been interested suddenly takes an interest. That can feel quite threatening. It can be a sign of insecurity. It can be a sign of lack of trust. Or it could be a recognition that, well, actually, I do need to be more involved. You need more support from me to do this. And the way you re-enter that engagement is important. So this is a really, really dangerous one. And then I guess the one that goes with the two of those is the happy wife, happy life. Now, that expression obviously comes from a time when the husband was the primary breadwinner. That's not the case in a lot of households today, but you can just as easily turn this around. It just doesn't rhyme as well. I saw a lot of this in when I worked in investment banking. So that was an environment where people worked hard, played hard, and earned a lot of money. And a big chunk of that earnings came as a year-end bonus. And so many people effectively indulged their partners as a partly assuaging their guilt for not being around. They may also have spent money on the kids as a way of overcompensating. The danger of that is that it gets out of control. I tell a story in my book about a colleague of mine. She was married to an investment banker, and her father had played this game because he was largely absent when she was a kid. He was an airline pilot, and Paul took over exactly where Sophie's father left off, and she spent. And I mean, I recall being at his bachelor's party, and he was going, I don't know how my income is ever going to keep up with Sophie's spending. And some years later, I caught up with him again, and he'd just been appointed a very senior job in Europe. And he said to me, finally, my earning capacity has outstripped Sophie's spending capacity. Now, that is a bit gendered. Obviously not always that case today, but it is a sign that, these are things that you have to grab control of. They can get out of control, and quite often it leads to hiding bonuses or hiding pay rises, all of which is just bad for relationships. So they're the 10, and as you can see, they're largely around the message that we deliver to our partner. We know what we mean, but what's important is what our partner hears. So all of those really come down to what is the money system that you as a couple choose to adopt, and how you're going to share the workload, and how you're going to share the goal setting and the getting on the same page. Really hard when you're both at work all day, you've got kids, there's household chores to do, there's bills to be paid. It can be hard to find time for this stuff. And so it is important that you are able to have sensible discussions around that. So that brings me on to what I call my 3 golden rules. There's more on this in the ebook, so I encourage you to download. I'll give you a link shortly. But here I'm saying, no secrets, everything on the table. 2, it's not about blame. So we've seen quite a few aircraft crashes recently, and exercise there is to find out what happened. It's not necessarily about apportioning blame, but it's about understanding what happened and why, and how we can stop it happening in the future. So when we're talking about money, don't go there with a blame mentality. It's well, here we are. Now what we do and how do we stop this happening again? And that, I guess, links closely to golden rule number 3, which is accept the past and let it go. And don't look back, look forward. And how do we get to a better answer in the future? So I think that's probably as much as I really want to say in terms of this. On the screen now, there's a QR code. That will take you to a link to download the ebook, which gives you a little bit more information about each of these 10 phrases and what you can do about it.